Okay, this is the second video in this series. So this one is about 1.2, the market. This is one that students sometimes struggle with just because it's quite economics heavy. So we've got demand and supply, we've got price and income elasticity here. So let's see how long this one takes us to get through. But again, this won't be completely comprehensive. It'll be a bit of a recap. So everything kind of on one page. So hopefully this will give you a bit of a summary of 1.2, the market. So the first thing is demand. Demand is the quantity willing or able to be purchased by the consumer. So the first idea is that demand is controlled by our decision making. When we choose what we are either willing to purchase, depending on a variety of factors we'll talk about in a minute, or potentially what we're able to purchase. So we'll have a look at this on a diagram. So if we think about the x-axis and the y-axis here, price would be on the y-axis, quantity would be on the x-axis. And the concept of demand is that demand goes down. And that's the easiest way to remember this. Demand equals down. And this makes sense, right? Because if the price is really, really high, we would expect to want to purchase less of it. Whereas if the price was really, really low, the quantity that we'd be willing to buy would be much, much higher because we potentially perceive to get more value for money. Now, there's a variety of factors that affect demand. There's two ways this could come up in an exam question. This could be a 4-mark construct question. Alternatively, this could be an essay question about factors affecting demand. And the key thing here is we want to avoid talking about price, because when we're talking about factors affecting demand, of course price affects demand, but that is a bit too obvious for an essay question in A-level business, and so you'll more likely be asked to focus on non-price factors. And so let's have a look at some of those. We've got, for example, the price of substitute goods and complementary goods. And so, for example, if you take a PlayStation, for example, you think about the demand of a PlayStation, you might not change the price of the PlayStation, but if the complementary goods like the games and the controllers and the accessories become cheaper, that might then lead to an increase in demand for PlayStations. Obviously, that could alternatively go the other way. If those goods become more expensive, we might see the demand for PlayStations drop. We've got income levels as well, of course, when we talk about our ability to purchase and decisions that we make. If we have lower levels of income, or we see potentially prices are rising at a higher rate than our income is rising, then we might see that our ability to purchase might drop. And so as a result, demand might drop. We've got tastes, fashions, and trends. Of course, we see this with a wide range of products. I remember when I was in sixth form, skinny jeans were just not in fashion. And then as soon as I left sixth form, skinny jeans became in fashion and have been for the last sort of 16 years or so. And now I think what we're starting to see is that, certainly what I'm seeing with my sixth formers, is that baggy jeans are back. And so these trends can change. We saw Ugg boots become really, really fashionable, disappear again, and then suddenly they're back. We've seen, I don't even want to get started on Crocs, but we can see that demand is hugely going to be affected by fashion and trends. And obviously there's a factor there in terms of celebrities and social media and influencers and what have you in terms of how those things are prompted. We've also got advertising and branding as well. And so positive advertising campaigns can have a huge impact on demand. Again, I think that one makes quite a lot of sense. And then also seasonality. So we know full well. I mean, I don't need to go into this in huge amounts of detail, but you could think about which products are going to be more popular in the summer, which products are going to be more popular in the winter. So demand is going to be affected by the seasonality of goods and the time of year. Umbrellas, shorts, coats, scarves, sunglasses, all of these things are going to be different in different seasons. In terms of supply, it's not too dissimilar. The difference here is when we're talking about supply, we're talking about the quantity that a business is willing or able to supply. And so this is, again, where we talked about consumers with demand, we're talking about businesses with supply. It is the opposite of what we would see with a demand curve. A demand curve would be demand down, supply points to the sky. So supply would go up. The idea being that if the price is going to be higher, businesses are much more willing to sell their products. If I'm selling pens, for example, for 10p, okay, maybe I can sell a few, that's fine. I might not make very much money on that. But if I can suddenly start selling pens for £15, suddenly I'm really, really interested because I'm going to make a huge profit margin. And so naturally what we'd expect is if the price is high, we are willing to sell that. We're willing to supply that. But if the price is low, maybe not so much, especially if it's not going to make us a profit. But there are a lot of factors that affect supply. We're going to focus on just a couple of these here. And again, this isn't an exhaustive list. It's just a bit of a recap. But things like the cost of production. If the cost of production increases, we might be less willing to supply because our profit margins for selling that product will be lower. Alternatively, if the cost of production drops due to maybe a change in supplier, or a way we're able to get our material costs down, we might now be more willing to supply a product because we're going to make more profit when we sell that good. Technology could lead to this. So increases in technology or in the introduction of new technology could lead to it being easier or cheaper for us to produce our goods, which could lead to us wanting to increase our level of supply. And then there's other areas as well, for example, like government support or indirect taxes. I've mentioned subsidies as an example here, just because if a government is prompting or encouraging a business to supply by subsidizing some of the cost of production, then that could potentially lead to a business being willing to supply more of that good. We'll talk a little bit more about supply and demand now as we combine the two into markets. So if we look at this diagram, I'm going to kind of talk through this in a very kind of functional way to think about how we get the 4 marks in an exam question. So the first mark will come from our axis, so quantity and price. That's going to get you 1 mark. The second mark is going to come from drawing our supply and demand curves. So 1 mark for supply and demand. Remember, demand points down, supply points to the sky. Our third mark, and this is, to be honest, first things first, if you just do that, you're going to get 2 marks on every one of these questions. So all we're really asking you to do is remember to draw 4 lines in 4 letters. You should be quite capable of that at A level. The third mark is where you have to make a decision. So you have to identify whether it is going to be a shift in supply or demand. And typically, we talked about businesses and consumers. Consumers, if it's something that affects consumers, it might be more likely to affect demand first. If it's going to affect businesses, it's more likely to affect supply. So in this example, I've just gone with a shift of supply, just to give an example of how the graph would show. So that's going to get you 1 mark for your shift. And obviously the key thing here is that if there is an increase in supply, that is going to go to the right. If there is a decrease in supply, that's going to go to the left. And that's the same for demand as well. So in this situation, you can see that our new S2 line in orange there, that has been a decrease in supply and therefore shift to the left. So that's going to get you the 3rd mark. And that's really the decision you have to make. The 4th one isn't really a decision either, because you just have to be able to identify this on the graph. But our 4th mark comes from doing our equilibrium markings. So you can see on green there, we've got P1 and Q1. That is at the S1 link, so our original supply line. And then Q2 and P2 is where our new line, so our S2 line, joins our demand line. So the idea is, in a business question, we would get our 4 marks, 1 for axis, 1 for supply and demand curves, 1 for the shift, and 1 for noting that equilibrium. So the best bit of advice I could give you with that is to just do as many practices of those as possible. Make sure you certainly get the first 2. And then with your shifts, you've got a 50-50 chance of it being between supply and demand. If you're guessing, you've got a 50-50 chance of it being an increase or a decrease, but hopefully you'll be able to figure that out pretty well. Next, we've got our elasticities. So price elasticity answers this question. If price changes, how much does demand change? And the idea with elasticity is that this is going to vary from product to product. But it's always going to be an inverse change, because when our price goes up, demand goes down. And when our price goes down, demand goes up. And that's always going to be the case in A-level business. So the idea here is that a price elasticity of demand figure will always be a negative. So this is the calculation. Price elasticity of demand is the percentage change in quantity demanded divided by the percentage change in price. So an example here would be if we had a percentage change of quantity demand of minus 10%, that would be as a result of a 5% increase in price. So if price is increased by 5%, we would see demand drop by 10%. That suggests a price elasticity of demand of minus 2. And what that minus 2 means is, it means that for every 1% price changes, demand changes by 2% in the opposite direction. So from the calculations that we do, we can judge the answers as to whether they make the products price elastic or price inelastic. So price elastic means we've got a price elasticity of demand of more than 1. Inelastic means we've got a price elasticity of demand of less than 1. So typically, products with lots of alternatives will be the elastic goods, because if, say, for example, if the price of a chocolate bar or a loaf of bread goes up, well, it's very easy for us to just find an alternative. And so therefore, you would expect demand to change quite significantly when the price changes. However, a good such as something you need, or something that has a really kind of high level of luxury or brand identity, you might find that a change in price actually doesn't have very much impact at all. Maybe because that's something we need to buy, or maybe that's just because it's something that has such a brand recognition that we're willing to buy it anyway, even if the price has gone up. So that's a very brief overview and introduction to price elasticity of demand. There's obviously far more to it than that, but hopefully it gives you a little bit of a kind of starting point or a recap. For income elasticity of demand, it's the same kind of concept, but with a few differences. The first, obviously the main difference, is that instead of thinking about price here, we're thinking about income. So if income changes, if income goes up or down, how much does demand change? And then the key difference here is that it is not always an inverse change. Income elasticity of demand can be positive or negative depending on the type of good. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. So the calculation is the exact same calculation as price elasticity. We're just changing the P to a Y. So income elasticity of demand is the percentage change in quantity demanded over the percentage change in income. So again, here is an example. So if in this situation we said that that income's dropped by 10% and demand dropped by 10%, that would be an income elasticity of demand of 1. So that means that for every 1% incomes change, demand changes by 1% in the same direction. So because it's a positive figure, it means that that's a positive correlation. One goes down, the other one goes down as well. Now we've got 3 types of good here to focus on. So a luxury good is one that has a highly positive income elasticity of demand. So that would be more than 1. A normal good would have a slightly positive income elasticity of demand. And then our inferior goods are going to have a negative income elasticity of demand. And what this means effectively is, like say for example, if we think about, like take Aldi as an example. I've used Aldi as an example already in the first video. If we think about Aldi as an example, Aldi actually tend to do better when incomes drop. So when incomes drop, their demand will increase because consumers looking to save money will switch to Aldi from more expensive competitors. So obviously, I don't think it's necessarily fair to say that businesses want incomes to drop, but there are some businesses that sell inferior goods that do benefit from that. Whereas you take something like a Ferrari or a Rolex, a luxury good, they would likely be negatively impacted because as incomes drop, then they would expect to see their sales drop as well, because some people may no longer be able to afford products. On the other hand, if incomes are rising, you should expect to see an increase in their demand quite significantly as well. So hopefully that covers 1.2, the market. It's not a big recap for what is a really quite complicated topic, but hopefully it gives you a nice starting point before you move on to do your additional revisions such as exam practice questions and what have you. And I will share some resources in the description of this video that will help you do that, including a document to do some practice exam questions, and some Quizlet links and some links to some of the videos on this channel that you can use to help. Thank you very much.